My guest today is Dr. Naomi Wolf, best-selling author, Rhodes Scholar, and CEO of Dailyclout.io. We discuss the recent attacks against her from mainstream figures and publications, the strange messages that came from this year's World Economic Forum, and the arrival of Disease X, what it means, and the possible motivations behind it. Dr. Wolf is somebody who has sacrificed everything to tell the truth, and her words pack a serious punch. Stay tuned. Dr. Naomi Wolf, welcome back. It's nice to talk to you again.
It's nice to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I've been looking forward to this conversation again since the last time we spoke. Last time we talked a lot about the Pfizer documents, and in the end, we talked about a book that was written about you, which is, I was talking to your husband Brian about it, and it's super creepy. But we could start there. You've been the subject of a lot of attacks coming at you from a lot of angles, and I guess let's start with the book Doppelganger because it's a very strange book. It's written kind of as an indirect smear against you. It was written by Canadian author Naomi Klein. Have you read the book and what was your reaction to it?
No, I haven't read the book and I don't plan to because my dad was a professional writer. He wasn't a famous writer or a commercially successful writer, but he was a true writer. And he basically taught me that any engagement of my ego in how people criticize me or praise me is wasted energy that should be going to my work. And from what I've seen of the bits that have against my will floated into my social media feed, she's thoroughly detached from reality, saying things that happened that never happened, attributing statements to me I never made. I never met her, to my knowledge. And then I found out that her husband is a spokesmodel for a major pharma interest in Canada, and that her father-in-law is on a board that received a $25 million vaccine grant. It's on a nonprofit devoted to vaccines. So there we have it. But yeah, so I just need to stay focused on my work.
Of course, yeah, and that's actually where I was going with this because it seems like there was some sort of underlying motive to the book. Would you be able to tell us a little more in detail as to what her husband does for Big Pharma?
Sure. And I think it would be interesting for you to reach out to her and see if, she'd like to tell you what the motive was for her book. It'd be very interesting to see if she responds to you. I mean, one of the frustrating things right now between the left, where I come from, where I've lived all my life, and the freedom movement, which is nonpartisan, is that the left won't talk to the freedom movement. And, often the freedom movement doesn't even try to talk to the left. So there are a lot of important conversations that are not being had, a lot of, it's not good for the country that there are two completely different information streams and there's no real civil debate or even mutual challenging of fact, in the same place. And social media lets us kind of attack each other in a very tranched way where we're not ever really face to face saying, is that true? What's your evidence? So I just wrote a Substack about that called Vitamin Wars, actually, where I'm bemoaning the fact that, you know, Naomi Klein and I come from the same training in, she's younger than I am, but we come from the same generation of how journalists are supposed to behave and how nonfiction writers are supposed to behave. And none of this is how real nonfiction writers or journalists are supposed to behave. You're not supposed to make things up from whole cloth. You're not supposed to not disclose conflicts of interest. I mean, her husband and her father-in-law both having ties to the pharma industry is a textbook conflict of interest that should be disclosed in the introduction to the book or the foreword, right? Pardon me, or the bio for that matter. We're not supposed to not have a clear line between advertising and editorial. We're not supposed to make defamatory claims. We're not supposed to hallucinate and put it in print. We're not supposed to threaten people. And one of the very disturbing things, you and I may have spoken about this, that I struggle with is that um, how can I put this? What I saw in the New York Times, which did come into my news feed, was an excerpt from her book in which there's a meditation on murdering the doppelganger, meaning the double, and I'm identified as her doppelganger. It's a very like if a man had written it about a woman that he didn't know, a male writer had like fantasized about the murder in detail of this woman he's never met, a real other human being, and called her his double and said that they had a relationship that they didn't have. Everyone would recognize that as a form of a mental illness called erotomania, which is quite dangerous because it leads to stalking and physical attacks, at times. And so the New York Times let her meditate on the murder of the doppelganger. And then they illustrated the piece with an image that I really can't get out of my head, which shows a wolf being strangled, bleeding at the mouth.
Oh my God.
How with the strangle, like it's almost like a dominatrix thing. The leash is being held by this kind of androgynous figure, which is implied to be the author of the piece. And that I read that as a threat,
Of
and
course.
I know that I used to be married to the editor of the op-ed page of the New York Times, and I know that a lot of care and thought goes into commissioning that artwork. It's not AI that just drops it in with no editorial sign off. So someone commissioned, let's get a wolf bleeding at the mouth, or let's get an animal that looks like a wolf bleeding at the mouth, being strangled. Um, anyway, I'm tired of all of this nonsense, honestly. And that's my response to that question.
Yeah, that's grotesque. I was not aware of that. And
Mm.
I mean, that's basically a death threat. I mean, let's be honest here, right? Like
Yeah, it is.
it really is. And I'm really sorry that you've had to go through all this, and we won't stay on this topic for too long.
I mean, I don't care. You can ask me anything, right? I mean, if
Yeah,
the whole point is freedom of speech, we should talk about whatever you want to talk about.
yeah,
But I guess it's very ironic because with the First Amendment being the law of the land, they've tried and tried and tried to censor us. The last way to censor people is
yeah,
reputational attack and implied visual threats.
yeah.
I'm like they're really like scraping the bottom of the barrel of how to shut people up.
Yeah, and so I'm of the left as well. I read
Hmm.
Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, way back in
Great book.
2008. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's held up by the left as kind of a Bible on foreign policy, right? And the dirty secrets of American hegemony. And I abandoned the left because I saw what the left was becoming. I saw that the left was moving too far to the left. It was becoming too extreme. And with that, journalism became more opinion based than anything. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find an article in really any of the mainstream newspapers or publications that isn't just purely opinion. I mean, it's like the ethical code of journalism has been thrown out of the window, and you know with yourself, I think you find yourself in this strange space, right? Because you're one of the key figures in second wave feminism, in my mind, right?
Sure, sure. My
Third,
mom was
okay,
second.
sure, sure, right,
No
okay.
worries.
But I mean, you're by all accounts a liberal. I mean, if somebody were to draw
What
a
does that
picture,
even mean anymore? I mean, I think of myself as a classical liberal, but what does that even mean anymore? Yeah.
that's right. And it's like these titles don't mean anything anymore. And it's like all of the real true liberals have kind of found themselves in the space where we are. I mean, when I when I when I look at uh, uh, when I look at people like yourself or Dr. Robert Malone or Dr. Peter McCullough and so on and so forth, I always try to weigh what you're saying versus what you have to lose, right? Because for somebody like myself, prior to now, I was making $80,000 a year at some corporation nobody gives a shit about. And so I don't really have much to lose doing this, right? And so I don't really expect people to take my word for it. And that's why I talk to people like yourself. But with you, I mean, you had a lot to lose. Can we talk about what you've lost in this journey? Because, I mean, you've railed against everything that the modern left, and I would call them the neo-Marxist left,
Mm.
stands for. And
Mm.
so, what impact has that had on you personally?
Uh, um, I mean, sure, I'll talk about it, but again, I don't think that's what's most important, right? Like as long as I'm alive and the people I love are safe, losing everything isn't really important. I mean, losing everything, material or professional isn't really important. And also, I mean, luckily, I'm very lucky in that I had a really good historical education, and I read the biographies of many, many, many people who had changed history. Not one of them had a good had a good time. Like they never get fame and riches in their lifetime. It's always taken away from them. They always are vilified and called horrible names. And I mean, like one of the people I admire most, Walt Whitman, who really was quite a visionary and kind of foresaw the modern world, the best of the modern world, and kind of visualized a time of emotional freedom for men and women, including what we people we would now call gay, right? Um, he was an absolute visionary, and he died in poverty. He was kicked out of his job in Washington in the government for writing salacious verses. He's now considered one of the greatest American poets. He was censored. Andrew Comstock went after him because there was a bad law called the Comstock Laws in 1873 that prevented people from sending obscene material, including information about contraception through the mail. And he had to his friends had to beg for money for him to treat his very serious illnesses, one thing after another. His publisher sent back the plates of his book in the 1880s when he was afraid of having the edition confiscated, and Whitman had to, luckily he knew how to publish his own book because he had been a printer in one of his early jobs. He self-published his own book. The point is, he died in poverty, and his name lives on. John Addington Symonds, who's the hero of the book that prepared the way for my reputational attacks in 2019 when it was canceled because of two you know errors of interpretation, which is pretty normal in a historical book about arcane, hard to interpret laws. Um, that book was about a guy who wrote the first gay rights manifesto and never lived to see that all the laws would change, in the way that he advocated. And he died at 52 of tuberculosis. Uh, and he could never go back to Britain because he was in exile, because in Britain, these acts were illegal. They were legal in Italy and in Switzerland, where he ended up living. I mean, I could go on and on. Emily Dickinson couldn't get published in her lifetime. I mean, Martin Luther King, the FBI was after him. He got assassinated. I mean, look what's happened to RFK Jr. Like literally everyone who's effective. Look at Jesus, like
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not comparing myself to Martin Luther King or Jesus. I'm just saying the really effective advocates for humanity, are lucky to survive.
Yeah.
And so I kind of feel blessed
Mhm.
that I get to advocate for humanity, and that, we've got enough to eat, and I'm not dead yet. And also super blessed and this is, like one reason I really do believe in divine providence. When I was getting death threats for standing up for, civilians who were being bombed on both sides of the southern border of Israel and Gaza, and the northern border of Gaza in 2014, uh, I hired Brian O'Shea, who literally has every single skill set to deter my abusers. Um, highly trained by the United States government. So I do feel very fortunate. That's a full-time job. Like he scans threats. His specialty is counter stalking. So, when I get a threat or some crazy person I send it to Brian and I'm like, how serious is this? And he can assess, ignore it, or this is serious, or
Mhm.
whatever it is. But he physically keeps me safe, in a way that, I'm just so lucky, because most people don't get highly trained bodyguards to, to be with them all the time, if they're doing this kind of work.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's a long answer, but I guess, sure. So what did I lose? I was deplatformed in June of 2021 for correctly warning that women were having menstrual dysregulation, to say the least, upon receiving mRNA injections. Not only was I deplatformed, and it turned out that that was at the behest of the White House, working with the CDC and the Bureau of the Census, which is scary because they have all my addresses. Um, I was simultaneously weirdly smeared around the world. My Wikipedia page changed like overnight. And all the sites that for which I'd been like a columnist for decades, or a featured commentator like The Guardian, the New York Times, um, all reported on me as if I was a crazy conspiracy theorist,
Mhm.
and stopped, like, don't even didn't even respond to my communications. And these are editors that have hired me for decades, right, to write columns, to be a columnist, to give quotes, to appear on their networks. Oh, like overnight, I'm a non-person professionally, and worse, like an anti-person, right? Vanity
Mhm.
Fair, someone I knew at Vanity Fair was sent to write a hit piece calling me an anti-vaxxer, and I'm like, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. If you write that, I'll have to sue you, like over and over and over and over. I mean, I kind of am now an anti-vaxxer, and found out a lot more about it, but that's a secondary point. The point is, it wasn't true at that time. All the checks on journalism in the legacy media failed, because all these people, and I trace this in The Bodies of Others, my book from one book ago, all these news outlets took the money offered by the CARES Act and by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to overcome vaccine hesitancy, meaning to target people like me. Um, for all I know, Naomi Klein's publishers took the money. I really don't know. Like, that money went everywhere, sloshed around to every, cultural institution. What else did I lose? Well, I lost my community in New York and DC, which was a very cozy community of global elites. I lost so many friends. I mean, even now, one of my best friends hasn't wanted to talk to me in person because they assume we don't share any values anymore, because I talk to people like Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson as if, like, you get cooties by talking to people who don't agree with you about everything. Um, Family, we haven't been to a Thanksgiving in 3 years. I mean, family members, would family members who are funded by the NIH, because I have a lot of scientists and physicians in my family, would call me to literally read me talking points from NIH scripts. Um, God knows how that happened. I mean, it's a crazy Kafkaesque reality. Um, and I could live with that. I can live with that, because I know that I'm on the right side of history. But it's getting, you happen to be talking to me on a pretty exhausting day, because there's yet another set of lunatics on the loose on the other side, who are, throwing a whole new set of falsehoods in my direction. So there we are.
Wow. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because you read these hit pieces against you and it's like, what did Naomi Wolf just wake up one morning and become a paranoid schizophrenic? Like this is a person I mean, by all accounts, you were a highly sought after liberal mind for a very long time. And then, you voice an opinion that's counter to theirs and all of a sudden you are persona non grata and in outcome the smears. So I want to pivot away really quickly and just talk about the World Economic Forum a little bit because Javier Milei gave a rousing speech, the World Economic Forum, in support of freedom and free market capitalism. And Kevin Roberts on a panel, I'm not sure if you saw, but he's the Heritage president. He lambasted the World Economic Forum on a panel. And I'm wondering, in your perspective, why is this happening? Because this seems pretty suspicious to me that they're allowing these people not only into the conference, but to speak, and also the recordings to reach the rest of the world.
Right.
Do you think there's some sort of motive behind that?
Well, I'm really glad that you raised that because, having been a political consultant to at the highest levels to Vice President Gore and to President Clinton's reelection campaign, that's exactly the question to ask because nothing is organic at those meetings. Nothing is released that hasn't been prepared, in advance. I mean, that's why I keep
Mhm.
saying about the disease X. It's not like they're going to Davos, they're deliberating for 3 days or however long it is, and then they're coming to a conclusion about disease X or about central bank digital currency or any of the horrors on the agenda. Those decisions have long been made in rooms that are not open to the public, or even open to delegates, right? And so, absolutely, if people gave resounding contrarian speeches, the speeches were vetted, the sound was kept on, the audio was released. All of it is theater. Um, it may be that those people believe that, but for sure, the World Economic Forum, I think, is realizing it has over what is it called when you like overshoot the mark, like overreached,
Yeah.
and that everyone hates it. And so they're kind of releasing the tension of the hatred by seeming to tolerate critics in their ranks, seeming to be chastised, seeming to be humbled. I mean, the theme is restoring trust, right? As I said on Bannon's show, only true sociopaths think they can try to kill, maim, or disable or sterilize most of humanity and then have a conference on restoring trust. But I would say that those speeches are like it could be both, right? People really need to understand that. Like the people who gave the speeches can really believe what they're saying, and a strategic decision was made on the part of the WEF to um, let that loose and let it play out. Yeah.
Yeah, I said this about the Canadian NDP leader, which is our Socialist Party, but I think it also applies to the World Economic Forum. They're like that crazy ex that sets your car on fire because you caught them cheating, and then sets your car on fire again because you won't take them back. It's like,
It's
they're
really funny.
and it's weird because, like, I my opinion on the World Economic Forum has changed over the last year. I don't think that they are what many people make them out to be. I think they're kind of like this low level, you know, bottom tier globalist group. I think the people that are behind them are the people that we really need to be concerned about. And we're not really seeing who the real hands on the levers of power are. And I don't know if that'll ever be revealed. But there has been a lot of talk about this disease X, this virus of unknown origin. And I think it's interesting that we haven't had a pandemic worthy of a lockdown or a mass vaccine rollout in over 100 years, and now all of a sudden we should be bracing ourselves for one pandemic after another.
Yeah.
In your view, what is the purpose of disease X?
Well, I also just want to gently push back on the way you characterized past waves of disease. I don't know how old the word pandemic is. I had never heard it before 2020. Um, and those used to be called epidemics. I
Right.
mean, as I gather from an earlier definition, I'm sure the definitions have changed. A pandemic is widespread death and disease over a wide geographical area.
Mhm.
There's no real evidence, like the data for COVID is so questionable that we really don't know how widespread those deaths were because so many other things were attributed to COVID,
That's right.
and chalked up as COVID deaths. So if you're talking about the 2008, I'm sorry, the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, it
Mhm.
was an epidemic,
Mhm.
and um, I don't know that there was a call for mass vaccination because I don't know that you can treat respiratory infections through vaccination, or if you could at that time. I don't recall reading history before 2020 that there was, well, there certainly were not lockdowns. And actually, I remember a lot of propaganda appearing around 2020 that seemed to be historical, saying there were lockdowns. It's not true. To my knowledge, very sick people have always been quarantined in the West. That's very, very different from locking down sick and healthy populations the way they did in the Warsaw Ghetto, or, to us in 2020 and 2021. So disease X. I mean, it seems pretty clear that there's a preparation psychologically for us to be told that disease X is among us. Notably, it's going to come from China again, of course. And that will have no way, as the last time, to really independently verify if what we're being told in the super freaky emergency is real. People will react in an abundance of caution and stay indoors, or not go vote, or not go to their town hall meetings, or not go pray, or whatever god awful thing will be the cautionary tale about how you deal with disease X. And um, as a result of disease X, the World Health Organization will usher in its treaty, draining everyone of sovereignty, which will then mean that mercenaries run by the WHO can show up at your door, take you away from your kids, take your kids away from you. In New York State, where I live, our governor keeps trying to pass regulations to open quarantine camps, detention centers. And I've read the regulations, and basically there will be no way out. There's no judicial review. There's no good behavior. You don't even have to be sick. You have to be exposed to a bloodborne pathogen. So my guess is disease X will be a bloodborne pathogen, whatever that is, because they've got the regulations ready already.
Mhm.
And that'll be that. So there are a lot of things we can do. One of the points I've been making about disease X is really fear, right? That's disease X. Like whatever else they claim the virus or bacillus is, that's, fear is what the disease is that they want to promote. And Dr. Michael Nels, the German neuroscientist, has written a really important book called The Indoctrinated Brain that points out that fear causes brain damage, basically, and inability to think in a nuanced way. And makes us susceptible to propaganda and really changes our personalities. So it's very important. I kind of think it's important for people to pay no attention to disease X. And if they're forced to pay attention to it, to do the opposite of what the state tells them to do. That's my, immediate take. And also that it's very important for people to get their news from independent outlets, because all of the legacy media outlets will, present a disease X on the platter.
Yeah, I think we're at a very critical point because, you know, I read a statistic the other day that over 50% of Americans believe that a lot of the excess deaths are coming from the adverse side effects from the mRNA vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
And I think disease X might be a break point. I think we see it happening in Europe right now, and I don't think North America's far behind. I mean, we're literally seeing French Revolution style uprisings begin. And
Where do you
I
see that in North America? Oh, you
no,
mean
yeah, in
overseas?
Europe, yeah, no, we're not. It
Yeah.
hasn't hit North America yet. I mean, you could argue that it started in Canada with the Freedom Convoy and then kind of caught fire in Europe, but I think there's a boomerang effect that's going to happen and it's going to reach us again. And I think disease X is a make or break scenario. It's one of those situations where either everybody falls for it again, we get locked in our homes. This is pure speculation, but what I think is I think they overshot the landing or overreached as we mentioned earlier with COVID-19. I think the true intention was to introduce a digital ID and a central bank digital currency to
Whoa.
keep us
Whoa.
locked in our homes, right? And they had to kind of let up on the tension because people were getting restless. And I think what they really truly do fear is a revolution, right? It's the people
Good.
going, yeah, exactly. The people throwing them out, right? And I think with disease X, that's the goal now. The goal is going to be lock us all in our homes, turn all transactions into online only
Okay.
purchases. And then through that, they can say, well, you need a digital identification. And because you're locked in your home, we have to issue a universal basic income, which will be distributed via central bank digital currency. So you will literally be a prisoner in your home and
Mhm.
100% reliant on the state for all of your basics, all of your essentials.
I mean, that sounds reasonable as a fear scenario. And, China kind of experimented on that with soldering people in their homes. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird the world that we find ourselves in now, right? I mean, I don't think any of us anticipated where we would be. I mean, I certainly didn't anticipate Naomi Wolf on Steve Bannon. That was a relationship that occurred that I never in a million years ever expected to see, and I think what the world has changed drastically. And
Yeah. I do want to just jump in on that though. I mean, it has, and I'm glad that someone of your generation is aware of how messed up and freaky things are, because the thing I really fear is not, people my age and older never seeing freedom again. What? Because we know the difference, right? My real worry is that younger generations will be born into this reality and not remember a time before captivity, right? But I have to believe that the longing for freedom is inbuilt into the human psyche. Also, well, anyway, I tell myself that. Uh, I do want to like gently again push back on this, like how surprising that someone like me from the left talks to someone from the far right like Steve Bannon. I just want to kind of invoke past America and past Canada, because to me something really bad has happened that we don't take for granted that people who don't agree with each other can have a productive conversation, or even
yeah,
a contrarian, argumentative conversation, right? Like, when did that happen? I mean, this, what you said is almost to my mind a much more polite version of what my old friends are saying. Like, how do we share the same values if you talk to those people?
yeah,
Talking doesn't mean, as my friend who does mediation says, listening doesn't mean agreeing,
mhm,
like, how else are we going to learn anything if we don't talk to people with who don't agree with us? Like,
yeah,
how else do we know where our views are correct if we never test them against the views of someone who totally disagrees with us? I miss the remember when people used to say it's a free country? Like, I miss the America and the Canada where everyone knew that people should talk to people who didn't agree with them.
yes,
So, I mean, I guess also I just want to say for the record, even when I was deeply living and published and aligned with the left, I always enjoyed talking to conservatives and people and libertarians, and not like I didn't enjoy talking to Nazis, but I wanted to talk to them because I wanted to understand how they came to believe what they
mhm,
came to believe. And people think I'm smart. Well, one reason I'm kind of smart at the advanced age I've reached is that I've I've never held back from talking to people who that I think are completely off base, or who think I'm completely off base. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
No, of course, and you raise a really good point. Because my generation, you're absolutely correct. See, I'm a child of the '90s. September 11th, 2001 was the day my entire life changed,
Right.
and I became politically active from that day forward. I'd always had an interest in
How
history.
old were you then? You must
I
have been
was I was 17.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm 41 now, so I would have been 18. I know I appear to be a little bit younger. The
You're
backwards
pretty
hat and
cool.
the sweater
I'm
kind of.
having what you're having.
but but no, I completely agree with you because after September 11th, 2001, it was like Bush, Cheney, neoconservatives are the ultimate evil. And so
Right.
people like myself who found themselves on the left, which I think most young people in my generation drifted to the left, right?
Sure.
We were trained to believe that the right is the enemy,
That's
right?
true.
And most of us never broke out of that. And for myself, my perspective didn't really change until I was in my mid to late 20s when I started reading like people like Thomas Sowell and getting an idea for what
Mm.
conservatism really is and realizing that there are great ideas on both sides of the political spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but you're absolutely right because we're locked into this kind of this team way of thinking, right? Like Naomi Wolf, feminist author of the left, Steve Bannon, conservative. These two shouldn't be talking to each other, but it's absolutely necessary for people like you to be talking to people like him. It's the only way we find solutions to these problems, right?
Well, quite. And so many of the most urgent problems we're facing right now are not left and right. They're tyranny versus freedom. So, I really probably disagree with Bannon on, I'll guess, um, gay marriage, although we've never really talked about that, and abortion rights. Maybe. I mean, who knows? But I'm guessing. And maybe, green energy to some extent. So I agree with him on free speech, free verifiable elections, the rule of law, uh, due process, all the things that are like the wedge issues are symptoms of people's policy choices, but the core issues we're aligned on, right? And that's freedom versus tyranny. So people, and right now that's the fight, right? It's not left versus right. It's people who are okay with tyranny versus people from whatever background who see freedom as the first priority.
Absolutely. I think that is the real divide now. The real divide is freedom versus tyranny, but it's constantly framed as left versus right because it contributes to the chaos, right? And
Totally. And it distracts us. Exactly.
yeah, 100%. So I know you got to run here in a few minutes. I want to talk to you really quickly about Donald Trump because there is a very, I mean, obvious effort to remove him from the American consciousness, and the message that he's sending, is really resonating even with the people who are of the left now. And I think you guys the U.S. has another just amazing candidate in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. If I was American, that's where my vote would be going. I want to talk about the political landscape and what's going on in the U.S. leading into November. I mean, do you think the attacks on Trump continues, and do you think that I don't know how to phrase this in a more sunny way, but do you think he makes it to election day? I mean, there's a very real effort to try to get rid of him and eradicate him.
Yeah, there is. I hate to say it, but he's such a brave guy. Like anyone else would step aside at this point, at his age. Um, well, I have to be nonpartisan. I did post a tweet that's gotten like 700,000 whatever views that said something like, do I have to stop hating the guy who's doing all the things I want? I mean, when do I get to stop hating? Do I have to keep hating him? Because he was talking about getting rid of central bank digital currency, which is so important. And I think digital ID I need to check, but I can't endorse. I don't think he'll be physically removed because it's very lucky to be married to Brian O'Shea because he explains that assassinations really don't pay off these days. It's cheaper and more cost effective to destroy someone reputationally.
Right,
He's not speaking personally, of course. He's just saying in the world of nefarious action on the global stage,
right.
um, assassinations make martyrs, and reputational damage is the way to go. So I think he'll be tied up in lawfare. I think people are going to want to vote anyway. But I do think I'm braced for, and this is why, I mean, it sounds really hokey, but this is why Brian and I are both like, get your dehydrated food, get your water in a giant jerry can, get your candles, get your generator, print out all your titles and life insurance policies in hard copies. I'm anticipating a major cyber attack. They could literally say there's been a nuclear attack on Texas or Illinois. And we would not know, and the propaganda machine, especially the AI, is so sophisticated now, that could be the message across the country. There's been a nuclear attack. We don't witness nuclear attacks, we'd have no reason, I mean, unless we're at the location, right? We have no reason to not, to be able to verify it one way or another. I don't like that all these elites are building bunkers. As I've said before, people at that level don't draft laws or build bunkers if they're not going to use them, right? They don't believe in wasted effort. They're not crazy, right? They're sociopaths, but they're not dumb. So yeah, I'm anticipating that there will be some emergency right in time for the election to keep everyone from voting in person, so that uh, the machines can be tampered with and they can be hacked remotely, or or so many mail-in ballots will be delivered at the last minute with no one overseeing it properly. That's my anticipation. I certainly think it's a long shot. It's going to be a fight. What I see is a fight around the outcome of the presidential election. A
Yeah.
very serious fight, like one that could uh, divide the country into two countries, literally.
The same thing is happening in Canada. Our premier, which is, the parliamentary version of a governor for our American viewers, is Danielle Smith. And one of the first things she did when she was elected was she eliminated the World Economic Forum
Hmm.
policy from our healthcare system.
Wow.
She's been,
Let's see.
oh yeah, well, she's technically a conservative, but in realistically speaking, she's a libertarian. She only really finds herself in the position that she's in because of Justin Trudeau. Her election is a direct response to Justin Trudeau. And in Canada, we're seeing a slow, painful dissolution of our Confederacy because people in the West, here in Alberta and Saskatchewan, not so much British Columbia, but we've had it. We're done. We're finished with this. And with all of the climate policy and carbon taxes, I mean, they're literally going to freeze people to death. I mean,
Oh my God.
this winter, with our carbon taxes, the people who are not as fortunate as, myself and my family, a lot of people have had to leave their heat off, right? And you got to remember, this last week we got down to negative 56 degrees Celsius with wind chill,
Holy
right?
cow.
Yeah, so people are going to die as a result of this climate
I don't
alarmism.
understand. It's too expensive to heat their homes, or they're told that
That's right.
they,
Yeah, in a lot of circumstances, the carbon taxes exceed the cost of the energy,
oh my
right?
gosh. Are there not like heating centers where people can go? Or like, I can't believe this is happening.
There's shelters. Again, this isn't widespread, right? But you talk it's if you're a minimum wage employee, right, and your family's just barely scraping by, a three for example, I paid my energy bill this morning. It was $313, right?
Good
And
heavens.
this is in Alberta, right? Now, if you think about being in British Columbia, where the socialist government is in power and the carbon taxes are way higher, the socialist government have added their own carbon tax. Imagine what a heating bill on a negative 20 degree for a negative 20-degree
Oh
week
my
must be,
gosh.
right? And this is the problem. So in Canada, Alberta and Saskatchewan are making real strides toward independence. And I actually see a future in Canada where we have
Excuse me, political independence or energy independence?
both energy and political, because in Canada, energy, like resource extraction, falls under the jurisdiction of the provinces, not the federal
Right.
government. And so
Right.
that's been the big fight between Alberta and the Trudeau Liberals. The Trudeau Liberals believe that they have a right to just tell Alberta when they can and can't drill for oil or drill liquid natural gas, right? And our argument is we can do whatever we want with it. It's in our constitution, right?
Wow, this is unbelievable. I don't get how a carbon tax helps. Like, people are supposed to cut down on their heating because it's so expensive. That's not realistic. I can see cutting down on driving or cutting down on,
But you can't.
hot tub, but people can't cut down on their heating, their homes.
Well, even driving in Alberta, like where I am, I'm in the Calgary area. You have to drive, right? Like we're kind of like Western Canada is kind of built like Los Angeles, right? It's built wide. So if you want to
Hmm.
take transit to get anywhere, it's going to take you hours. You're never going to make it on time. So you
Yeah.
have to drive, right? So in Alberta, I mean, the provincial government here has done a really good job at trying to keep costs as low as possible, right? And meet the energy demand. But we've also our previous government invested heavily in renewables, which are proving to be a catastrophic failure, right?
Wow.
On the day that I just referenced was the coldest day of the year. Our wind and solar completely failed, right? We were running almost 100% on liquid natural gas, right?
Gosh,
And so
holy cow,
it's
what
just
a
further,
vulnerability.
yeah, well, it's just further proof that you can't get away from these energy sources. You just can't. We're not there. We don't have the technology, right? And so I see a similar scenario unfolding in the United States with your Green New Deal and other policies that are coming down through. I call it the Biden administration, but he's not there. There it's the real deep state that's running the show in the US. And so I see a similar thing happening there where, your republic is breaking into pieces, and, states are starting to consider themselves sovereign, separate of their federal government, even though they're still technically part of the United States.
Wow, they have already separated.
No, no, sorry, I'm talking about the United States. I'm just talking about the perspective in general,
Right.
just
Well,
the
yeah,
strides toward independence.
totally. I mean, I'm thinking when you're speaking of what's happening in Texas, which is the Biden administration would not secure the border. Millions of fighting age men, if you listen to my husband and JJ Carroll, are coming in, being shipped to strategic points around the country and, wreaking havoc on Texas. And so Texas sent, is arresting people against the will of, it really calls to mind some of the great fights between the federal government and the states, like the civil rights fight, which was, the states were on the wrong side of history, but maybe in this case, they'll be on the right side of history. That is fascinating. And what happens then usually is that one federal government will fail or not be successful, and the next government that's federal, or in your case, national, will be more aligned with the will of the people. I hope it's not a kind of breaking up Canada, breaking up US outcome, because the globalists would love that. They'd love us to all be Lithuania,
Yeah.
not superpowers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Wolf, I know you got to run. Before you go, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Thank you so much. Yes, please go to dailyclout.io and subscribe and or donate. We need your help. We're rolling out, to your question, election integrity bill, which is a beautiful draft bill, but it's expensive, so we need people's help with that. We're going to get it to all 50 states before the election. Um, you can go to my Substack, which is called Outspoken, and you can buy The Bodies of Others, my last book, and Facing the Beast, this book, on Amazon or on Chelsea Green's website, or right there on Daily Cloud. Thank you so much.
Of course, yes. It's always an honor to talk to you, and I really recommend your Exodus series for everybody who's looking to listen. And
Oh, thank
yeah, and
you.
I was hoping to touch on the Pfizer documents today because there's so much more going on there, but
Going on.
we'll
Yeah.
save that for the next one.
Wonderful. I'd love to come back.
Awesome.
Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you.